I talk to financial advisors every single day of the week. Very good friend of mine, Bill Backrack, likes to say that he works with the top financial advisors in the world or those who aspire to become the top. I would sign on to that. I would say that I try not to work with advisors who don't make a commitment to become the best financial advisor in their town. One of the number one comments that I get from advisors who are above average, but when I try to make the case, it'll be a lot easier for you growing your business when you're undoubtedly the number one firm in town. I often get advisors who says, "Who's got time? Mark, where do I find the time to become the number one top financial advisor in my community?" This video, I'm going to talk about the answer to that. The answer in part lies in a book I always recommend that financial advisors read. It's a book written by a friend of mine, Perry Marshall. The book is called Detox, Declutter, Dominate: How to Excel Through Elimination. So we're going to go through this content in this video, but there is another book that Perry wrote that I also think financial advisors should read. It's called 80/20 Sales and Marketing. For those of you that are not as familiar with the 80/20 rule, the 80/20 rule in essence says that 20, the community of the number of whatever you're measuring, represents 80% of the value received. I'll say it a couple of different ways and see if you agree. This is almost always true. If I start working with a financial advisor, I'll say, "How many clients do you have?" They'll say, "I don't know, 110. Okay, great. Make a list of their net worth on a spreadsheet and then sort it from largest to smallest." The law of 80/20 says that the 20% of those clients, roughly 20 clients, represent 80% of the wealth of the clients at that firm. All right. It's such a compelling concept that it pops up everywhere. I would go further and say that 80% of referrals, my own included, but any advisor we work with, 80% of referrals come from 20% of the clients. 80/20 is such a consistent rule in business that I consider it a law, like the law of gravity. You just have to see it and dial it in to find it everywhere. How it fits into this book with Perry Marshall wrote this incredible book called 80/20 Sales and Marketing about this 80/20 concept. He makes the case that if he took, I think in the book, he took a list of the earnings of every domestic airline company in the United States, American, United, Southwest Airline, all of them. He could tell you he could tell you the number that a company is in the list of earnings based on the total earnings of the group. So it would, in essence, figure out that 20% of those companies represent 80% of the total earnings of the group, which ended up being true. Then you could take the earnings of any company at random. It'll tell you what number on that list that company is. It's all math. So how does that apply to this book? This book is that book, the 80/20 Sales and Marketing book, but it's the best 20%. It focuses on a part of the book that was covered in the 80/20 Sales and Marketing book, but he really emphasizes it in this very short book. It's almost a workbook with exercises. This is the 20% that is 80% of the value of the 80/20 Sales and Marketing book. What do they mean? How to excel by elimination? We'll get into that, but I want to go through 80/20 and answer the question to the advisor that says, "I got 110 clients. I'm full. Where would I ever find time to up the level of my game to become the only game in town?" The answer to that is in 80/20. Let me show you how. There's many answers to this, but this is the one I want to focus on in this video. I'll start by saying you should only be doing $1,000 an hour. We'll get into what that means in a minute. But of all your hours in the week, in addition to only doing $1,000 an hour work, you should spend 20% of your time doing $10,000 an hour activities. So what does that even mean? There's a couple ways to approach it. The simple way to approach it is if you can hire someone to do a task that needs to get done in your office, it would cost less than $1,000 an hour, then as much as possible, you need to get that off your plate so that you can focus on the activities that drive $1,000 worth of revenue for every hour. So I'll give you an example in a minute. But what I think it really helps you think is if I need to only be doing things that generates the firm $1,000 for that hour of productivity of mine, that for sure means I need to get rid of the $20, $30, $50 an hour stuff. So if you find yourself typing or anything tracking or anything having to do with administrative part of your business or hunting for files in the server, if you find yourself doing things like that, those go off the plate first. What do I mean by $1,000 an hour activities? You go back in the previous year, you make a list of all the revenue that you earned last year. You try to find the 80-20 in that list. Every time you got paid, you write it down, you put it on a spreadsheet, you list those sources of revenue in descending order so that the thing that brought you the most revenue is at the top and the thing that brought the least revenue for you last year is at the bottom. Now, these are things that you were doing last year that you took care of yourself. Just focus on the top 20. You look at everything that you earned last year. You look at the top 20% of those sources of revenue. For me, it'd be clients. So in most financial advisors, it would be clients. So here's the list of clients where I earned revenue last year. Top 20% is going to be these clients. Okay. So that's the 20%. Then you start thinking, what did I do to source that business? What were the actual activities that I did? You'll find very quickly in our business, it's different for every business, but in our business, I'm willing to make a wager with you that what it ends up being is for those top 20%, it was that you spent time face-to-face or on the phone somehow with these non-clients, and somehow they became clients. So when you start to analyze all the activities that drove that top 20% of your revenue that represented 80% of the revenue, you'll see that it's a pretty short list. Mostly you were doing face-to-face interactions with non-clients of some sort. So that's what you should be doing. Whatever it was that drove that business last year, you need to break it down into the actual activities. So sometimes you called them, sometimes you went out and just grabbed coffee with them and catch up. Sometimes you interacted with them in a formal face-to-face meeting. Whatever it was, you start to break down that top 20% of your revenues. What were you actually doing that drove that revenue? Now you've got a list of $1,000 activities. I will wager that if for the top 20% that drove 80% of your revenue, when you break it down and you add up the hours, you divide by the number of hours that you spent doing those things, it's going to be over $1,000 an hour. In our industry, anything you do that's pretty much face-to-face on the phone or on Zoom, directly interacting with a non-client that, let's call it a potential client or maybe a referral source. Maybe they don't do business, but they put you in the path of someone who does meet your ideal client profile. Either way, when you sit down and figure out how many hours were involved in each of those clients bringing that revenue to the firm, every activity is going to end up being, I'll be darned, when you look at the revenue generated versus the hours that I spent doing this, it's $1,000 an hour activity. So now you've got a list of $1,000 activities. If you do the 80-20 of that top 20, which is to say, let's say 20% of the clients, meaning 20 clients, let's say you acquired 100, set up 100 new accounts last year. The top 20% is going to represent 80% of the revenue, but the 20% of the 20%, I'm talking about a very elite small group, maybe 4 people, 5 people, something really small. You do the activity that it took to drive that revenue. What were you actually doing to generate that revenue? How did you meet them? How were you introduced to them? Did you spend time with the person that introduced you? What were you doing? What did you say? What actually happened in the process to acquire this new client? When you add up all those hours, I will make you a wager. That's going to be $10,000 an hour activity. And so you need to spend all your time doing $1,000 an hour activity, and anything that would cost you less than $1,000, you need to be hiring someone or delegating and figuring out a way to either delegate or dump or delay everything else that you need to be doing in order to be focusing on those top 20%. And then the top 20% of the 20%, this will actually make your time more productive. This is where, following this 80-20, I 10x'd my business. That's how I did it. I started my journey after a dozen years in the business at $342,000 in net revenue. In 34 months, applying this principle, I moved from 342,000 to 1.6 million in 34 months. And then at that point, going from 1.6 to 3.2 million in less than 3 years, that was part of the journey. So all I'm saying is, you follow this formula, you're on the path to 10x, because you're focusing on the few things that drive the biggest results. You're finding other ways to get everything else done. Okay, so that's focus. Focus on what you should be doing. Get out of the things you shouldn't be doing. So that's where this comes in. This 20% of the 80-20 sales and marketing book focuses on, how do you declutter your life? How do you focus on the 80% of things you're doing in the week that only drive 20% of your revenue? Something I should have said earlier that I failed to mention, this 80-20 is a concept. The concept is, small number of activities generate huge results, but it might not be 80-20. The concept is the same, whether it's 90-10 or 70-30. I'm not so hung up on that it's exactly 80-20. It's a concept. Perry Marshall, he describes it as, small hinges swing huge doors. There are small points of contact in your schedule that if you just do those things, it'll generate 80% of your revenue. If you spend all your time rather than just a few hours a year doing these things, if you came in every day, did that from minute you got in to the minute you leave the firm, if you just focused on those activities, you're going to generate a lot more revenue. Not a little more, a lot more. The key is the breakthrough in your mind to recognize this. As a financial advisor, I hadn't thought about it. I didn't realize that if I sat down and went through the exercise the way I described it, I didn't realize that now I'm doing more productive things. This is what they call working smarter, not harder. Okay. So I'm putting in the same amount of hours. As my good friend Bill Backrack is fond of saying, we all get the same 100 hours in a week. And if you've ever wondered, how is it that I've got 168 hours? Elon Musk has 168 hours. How is it I'm generating millions, he's generating billions? What's the difference? Somehow he's deploying his 100 hours in a more efficient way. I don't know, but I've studied Elon Musk enough to know that he focuses only on the things that matter. He is a small hinge swinging huge doors with Tesla and SpaceX and all the companies that he owns. All right. So back to decluttering your life. Let's call it detox. You're going to go through, as you think about this, you're going to identify the 80% of what you're currently doing that represents 20% or less of your revenue. And we're just going to make an agreement up front before we do a thing that if you can identify those things, if you can confirm it for yourself, I'll be darned, this 80% of what I do day to day just generates a tiny bit of the revenue. At least the process starts with acknowledging this and starting to identify and flag these less productive activities. I think it really starts with a little time study. There are time tracking softwares online. Our firm uses a tool called Toggle, T-O-G-L, but it doesn't matter. There's 100 of them. They're easy to use, easy to set up on your computer. You don't do anything different other than just remember to start the timer when you start doing a task Then when you change to a different task, you hit the reset and you call it a different thing. In the end of the week, when you just hit total, it'll give you the categories of activities. What were you doing during these time periods over the past 7 days? You need a system. The reason we chose Toggle is we're all human. We forget, like I'm 20 minutes into the next task and I'm thinking, oh God, I forgot to set the timer. You can go back and edit it. At the end of the day, I can clean it up and I can say, no, I spent more time doing this. So you need a time tracking system that's easy to use and will allow you to edit and correct it on the fly. And then at the end of the week, I think you'll be surprised. You'll be surprised how much idle time. It could be, I don't know, commute time in the car. It could be usually what it is. You're doing far more what I would call administrative support type tasks or tracking than you realized. So there's the way to start. So now you've got a list of things that aren't $1,000 an hour activities, or you could hire someone to do for less than $1,000 an hour. I recommend that you categorize these tasks in a couple of different ways. One is this a $30 an hour task or is this a $50 an hour task? So you start to categorize these activities based on skill and experience level. I also try to rank them just with difficulty. It might be not require a lot of skill and experience, but it's quite complicated to do tracking or filing or whatever it is, the way you do it. It's the reason you do it is because you keep saying over and over, it takes less time to do it myself. That's the biggest trap in the world. But you start identifying these tasks that are not clearly not $1,000 an hour activities and start to profile them in terms of how many dollars an hour is it, and scale of 1 to 10 difficulty, or how complicated or hard to do are these tasks. And so let's just face it, the obvious next step, it's not how to save time. As my former coach, Dan Sullivan, said, he wrote a whole book on this. It's a who problem. It's who, not how. So you know how to delegate a lot of this stuff, but you don't know who to delegate it to. So let's just face it, you're going to have to look at hiring an administrative support person, and they better be strong. They better be highly skilled. They better be able to take everything off your plate that isn't $1,000 an hour activity. Now you can help them out and say, here's a short list of things that I'm trying to get out from under, and then see how they do. Now, here's where a lot of financial advisors run into difficulty. You need to be really strict on this. And I think it's the most kind-hearted thing you can do is to give your administrative manager. Now, maybe at this point, you can only afford a part-time, maybe virtual assistant. That's okay. If you've got a small shoestring budget, that's fine. Work with the budget you have. But with the budget you have, make sure that the person that you bring in as, let's say, a part-time virtual assistant, that they have a high level of skill, they have a high level of experience. And the minute they hit the ground with the time budget you give for them in a week, they start pulling things off your list. You shouldn't have to tell them a lot. They will have questions. They will need access to you enough to understand how things work in your office. But you shouldn't be sitting there putting together their curriculum of step-by-step, here's what I need you to do to save me time. No, you have the right person when they immediately come in and start adding value. They just take over. The formula that I like to use is trust and verify. It's only hire people on your team that are worthy of your trust. And that means on the front end, interview quite heavily to make sure that they are truly up to the task, that they are skilled, they are experienced. I always look for 3 things in a team member: head smarts, hunger, and humility. I look for all 3 of those. In the interview process, I have them tell me how they rate themselves in these 3 areas. And then, of course, I spend more time than the average employer actually checking their references, asking the same 3 questions of the people that they provided as references. If you have somebody really smart and they are humble, Meaning, in my world, it means, oh, they're not grabbing credit off other people's plates and they're not throwing anyone under the bus. They're humble. They like to see others on the team succeed. And then hunger, that's the one. I expect leadership. I expect initiative. I expect productivity. So let's call it, I know within 2 weeks, 3 at the most, whether this is working or not. So let's say you interview, I don't know, 10 part-time virtual assistants. You think one is the best. You say, hey, let's give this a try. Let's try it for a few weeks. Most states in the United States allow for a probationary period, whatever you want to call it. I just say, let's give it a try. So whether you put an end date on it or if you just hire and get started, doesn't matter to me. But all I'm saying is, at what point will you know if it's not working out? This is what financial advisors often don't do when they bring someone onto the team. You should be able to tell at the end of 2 weeks whether they are adding value on their own steam. Do they know what they're doing? Is their skill and experience that you sensed in the interview actually showing up in the office? And in the case of an administrative support person, they should start taking things off your plate on day one. So you'll know at the end of 2 weeks whether it's a good fit or not. You'll make a final decision in the 3rd week. The commitment I want to recommend that you make to yourself is be honest about it. If at the end of 2 or 3 weeks, you're not getting enough juice for the squeeze, meaning for the effort it took to find this person and get up to speed, they're not taking things off your plate at a rapid enough pace. If in the training part of it, you're spending more time getting them on board than you are saving time by having them there, in this particular role, administrative support, that can't happen. They need to be sufficiently skilled, sufficiently experienced to figure out ways to ask you the right questions, start gaining control and authority of enough of the moving parts to begin immediately taking things off your plate. So this is the formula. Now, what do you do when someone is doing good, but not great? So you bring someone on, they're saving you time, no question, but you still look at that list of $1,000 an hour activities and you're still not doing just that. You keep getting pulled into other things. You need to learn how to tell your administrative support person high fives when they do a great job for you. You need to encourage them. You need to recognize them when they do good work. All right. Likewise, if they are not impressing you, then you need to state that. You need to come to them and say, isn't this your job to take off my plate? Maybe they were unaware. So I'm open to the idea that an administrative manager type person might ask most of the good questions, but maybe not ask every question to discover all the things that really need to take off your plate. You can help them out. You can assess them on the things within the first 2 or 3 weeks that they are rapidly taking off your desk and handling or delaying or deferring. I don't care what they do as long as it creates time for me. But by the 3rd week, you're making a decision. And if they continue because they're good enough and they've certainly helped, well, then the onus is on you to share the list of everything under $1,000 an hour activity that they need to start creating a plan and thinking about how to take it off your plate. They can grow into the job, that's for sure. But you need to get used to saying to your people when they bring you a problem, isn't that your job? Or if they bring you work that's below your standards, you need to get used to saying the word that employers hate to use, but you need to get used to it. You need to get used to the word unacceptable. When anybody does something or produces work product or anything that is unacceptable, you need to use that word. It's an underused word in that use it sparingly, but only because there are not unacceptable things happening very often. But when they do occur, use that word. It'll get the attention of your team. If you'll start calling it out when it's unacceptable to you, you don't have to do it in a mean-spirited way. You just tell them the truth. This is not acceptable here. And then you paint the picture of what excellence looks like. So next time I want it like this. Oh, by the way, why don't you create a documented process so that I can ensure there's going to be consistency and this will never happen again. So now you've got somebody supporting you. Here's the hardest part. The formula for bringing someone effective onto your team is make sure they're worthy of trust. Check. We talked about that. Then you need to empower them. You need to give them enough authority to the point where they have control over enough of the moving parts to make decisions to take things off your plate. They don't have to keep coming to you every 5 minutes. Hey, okay, this, or what do you think about this? Or I need your opinion on this. No, you need to work really hard to give them enough control over their job that not only are they proactive and doing a good job of taking things off your plate, but they are actually gaining authority along the way because you're giving it to them. They're worthy of trust. They have enough control, and you've given them enough authority to actually make your life night and day better. And then the third and final piece is they're worthy of trust. So trust them, let them run, cut them loose, let them off the leash. Don't keep coming every 10 minutes and saying, show me every step of what you're doing. No, acknowledge that they may do things differently than you do. Acknowledge that they will get things wrong, but that it's better for you to let them run because it'll be better in the long run. They're worthy of trust. So you've taken care of that. You're not giving control to people that aren't worthy of the trust. You're then empowering them to actually make your life easier and give back the hours to detox and declutter your life. You've given them enough authority to do that. And then you trust them by releasing them from just having them under your thumb. As the thing I do require of my people is status updates. When it comes to this administrative support role, which in our training, I call this the administrative manager, but so in our offices, this would be the administrative manager in the office, but I want daily status update check-ins. I want to know what's happening. Just because I've delegated authority to a lot of things doesn't mean I'm abdicating anything. The onus is on my administrative manager, just 15 minutes a day. The onus is on them to find 15 minutes in the schedule every day to sit down and give me a daily status update check-in. And in that 15 minutes, the responsibility is on them to fill me in on everything significant that got done. If anything that was supposed to get done didn't get done, just make me comfortable that I used to do it myself. Now you're doing it. Now make me comfortable with that. So it's a communication issue that you close that gap. But you follow this detox regimen that we described, you start getting everything under $1,000 an hour off your plate. Voila. You have not only created the time that you were asking me about, like, how will I ever find time to be the #1 financial advisor in this community? I don't have time to up my game. I'm too busy doing what we're doing here. I beg to differ. You identify the 80% that can be cut, and then you delegate that, maybe get rid of some of that. But the point is, you're bringing someone in to take charge of that, and that you're focusing all of your time on the 20% of the activities that will really make a difference in your business. They'll get you on the track to 10X. At the very least, you're going to be doing the 20% of the things that generate 80% of your revenue. That's definitely a good thing. Now, where you find the time, it's on both sides of the 80-20. I hope this was helpful.